think it begs the question of why too, right? Like, why would you want to do anything you want, whenever you want, however you want? What's the purpose behind it? What's the meaning behind it? And I think that speaks to like, what's the I behind it? Like, what is this thing, in the sense that human beings are all searching for meaning, and what's going on here, that it's like you really have to tackle that question
Mhm.
first. Um, Within all of this, how, of course, both of us have a deep vested interest in helping people with this, and that's really what the book and your work as a whole speaks to. Um, but again, to honor what you said in the beginning, that it's like it's still learning, still growing, that this is not a perfectible practice. Um, how would you suggest anyone maybe kind of dip their toe into these waters to think about whether or not we may be overflexing, for those of us that are actively trying to help other people do it while we're learning, but also for those that maybe have never considered this before? What is kind of maybe a practice or a thought or something to check in on
Mm.
this journey?
Yeah, thank you. It's going to sound like a way oversimplification, but it's a simple doorway into something that's very, very complex and multi-layered in possibility. But I believe with everything I know that when we connect back to nature, even if we don't really necessarily vibe with nature, but when we connect back to nature, this is where we get in right relationship to ourselves and to the greater whole.
Mm,
So, and there's a way that nature, when it connects with us, alters our nervous system and our thinking and our frequency in a way that we just start to understand things better. um, and we start to understand ourselves better. And it's not necessarily a linear process, and it's not
right.
necessarily something that we totally conceptualize or understand, but it does seem to kind of create coherence, right?
Yeah.
And so I love to tell folks when they come here to the ranch that, and they've invested a considerable amount to do a retreat with me, that, on the surface, I'll be talking, we'll be in dialogue, we'll be doing exercises together, but make no mistake about it. There is a conversation happening between you and the trees, you and the soil, you and the horses, you and the sky, that it's having its way with you. And you don't, even if you have amnesia about your retreat, you are going to leave here changed.
Yeah.
And I love that because it means, they can relax. And so if people just spent a little more time, either put a few more potted plants in their house, or just spent a little more time hanging out with their dog and just allowed that companionship to touch them, that they're going to find things get more aligned for themselves. So that would be the,
Mm, that's
yeah.
so beautiful. I love that. And I think it, there is something to the sacred simplicity of it too, right? That's like we don't need to overcomplicate each and every one of these things and make it feel so inaccessible. And speaking of the inaccessibility of a lot of this work, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is the way you talk about meditation in the book. And I think
Yeah.
that even the gift that you give these retreat goers of saying, like, yes, we'll be doing things, but like no matter what, you're gonna get something out of this. Like, take the pressure off of it,
Yeah.
makes it so much easier to be. And in the meditation, you in discussion around meditation, you talk about the difference between just being and meditating. And I found
Mm.
that personally so helpful because I I think I'm predisposed to, really wanting to lean into this kind of like, oh, I'm meditating, or like I'm going on a spiritual journey, or, all of these things. Like that's certainly what how my constitution likes to make meaning. Why do you think it is that telling someone or inviting someone to just be instead of meditating makes it feel attainable and accessible? Because I think the language around meditation turns a lot of people off. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
I can't do that. I can't just sit in silence and do nothing. What am I
Right.
supposed to,
Right.
So yeah, talk to me about this and the
Yeah.
accessibility of some of this
I'm
work.
delighted that you spotted that. Um, so there's, let's see, where do I want to start? So first of all, I've always been a very sort of moving, active person, and always had a hard time with crossing my legs and sitting quietly for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. Um, our brain is always streaming thoughts. So good luck quieting the mind. That's not going to happen. You may find different states that arise sometimes, but honestly, none of that is necessarily worth a whole lot. It's just kind of mental acrobatics that are happening, and some people settle into their constitution is that they can settle into that much easier than others. I My teacher taught me that, and his teacher taught him, and his teacher was Ramana Maharshi, who was a sage in India. I think he died in the 1950s. He was known as the silent sage. He never said a word. He lived in a cave. But the point to meditation, aside from what the spiritual new age industrial complex wants to have you believe around, better creativity and less stress, the point of meditation in its truest form is to connect us with life itself, with consciousness, with God, the divine. That's the point. To remind our body that feels very separate from all of those things, to remind our body and our mind that we are, in fact, a part of a greater whole of consciousness. That's the point. To kind of, as my teacher would put it, to return to our beloved, for its own
Hmm.
sake, not so that I am more stress free, not so that I can be enlightened, because that's ridiculous. It's so that I can return to something that is really existentially close to my being here as a human on earth. And so why wouldn't I want to visit that space 100 times a day? Why wouldn't I want to go back to my beloved and kiss them in the hallway 100 times a day? And so it's the spirit of like, oh, just every few moments, every few minutes, every few hours, just dropping into beingness for a few seconds to just like, oh yes, and this, oh yes, yes, this is what matters. And doing it kind of in that way, more sort of micro doses throughout the day, actually changes the fabric of your day, in a really beautiful way, because I can be like sweating over an Excel spreadsheet and like really in it, and then just take a breath and drop in into beingness and then head back to it again. And I don't know, it's just like it's that important hit of oxygen, and it makes my in person, in the world life feel divine.
Yeah.
Opposed to like, I'm going to compartmentalize, and this morning from 9 to 9:30 I'm going to sit with my legs crossed and burn some incense, and then I'm going to go and be all stressed out for the rest of the day.
Right. Right. I was listening to a podcast episode with Rainn Wilson's Soul Boom podcast, and he talks a lot about this, and he was criticizing this idea that like, well, I'm going to be spiritual in my yoga class from 3 to 4:30
Right.
on Thursdays, and then the rest of life is whatever this
Right.
show is, this
Right.
performance is. And it's like that, yeah, just saying it in that way makes it sound so ridiculous, but it's like, is that not what we've kind of started doing? And you
Yes.
can't, if the whole point is to be connected, you can't separate it out in this way.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
One thing
Yeah.
that you said, I mean, obviously that also really impacted me. I teared up a bit hearing you say it's returning to your beloved. Like this
Mm.
word of beloved is just so like the thing that is held so precious. And I think that really opens the gateway to self love, to seeing the humanity in others, right? Like all of these things that are so healing. One other thing you said that I want to go back to is not to be enlightened because that's ridiculous. Talk to me about that. What is the ridiculous nature of the conversation we have around enlightenment? I think that
Well,
I tend to agree with you in a lot of ways, but also it's nuanced, right? So talk
yes,
to me
it's
about
very
that.
nuanced. Yes, yes. So, well, as long as there's a someone, so it's great. We've traveled this spectrum of being this embodied human in space and time on Earth, feet in the ground, feet in the soil, right? And having this intact ego, different, healthy, differentiated ego. And then we're going into this more transcendental place of like egolessness, right? And both exist in this amazing life, both, not one or the other. But if you're, so as we look towards this idea of enlightenment, enlightenment is about understanding that there is no self, there is no ego, there is no human, there is no life. This is all just an illusion. All is just consciousness, bliss, whatever. But if you're a someone sitting down and having your meditation to give up your ego so that you can be enlightened, all you do is develop a spiritual ego.
Snaps on that. Wow. And then the journey really does become about how much can I separate from
Right.
this thing, right? And it's like we lost the plot from the beginning.
Yes. Yes. So, and believe you me, as a very, very ambitious 28-year-old, I was by golly going to get enlightened. And I did everything, hey, I graduated cum laude in college. I was going to do it. I was going to do it. And of course,
Yeah.
I that was going to do it,
Right.
it was all spiritual ego. So, the ultimate enlightenment for me, I noticed it. I noticed the byproduct of my enlightenment, if I could call it that, was that I stopped talking about enlightenment. I stopped thinking about enlightenment. The byproduct was I stopped searching. I just started finding. Um,
Mm.
and I don't even
Wow.
really know how to talk about all that, but and to me, that's freedom. That's freedom. When one is uh, untethered from the seeker, with all these ideas of who the seeker needs to be and how they need to behave, and how because I think my idea of enlightenment was I was going to be a better version of me, like somehow not
Right.
traumatized and like never triggered and like all this.
Yes, all of the things that are promised by like what you
Yes,
said, this kind of capitalist
yes,
product that is spiritual enlightenment. It's like, since when could you commodify spirituality and connection? Like, how do we not see what we're missing? Um, and one thing that really, really hit me in the book that I think, along this spectrum that we're talking about between those in the spiritual community that kind of fall into this trap in a maybe like couched in a way that seems more enlightened versus the communities of, I'll call them entitlement, in that it's what freedom devolves into, even though I hope that that doesn't sound judgmental because that's not how I'm just using it as like a moniker for
yes, right.
that space.
That's
Um,
right.
that both of these kind of pathways, it's about doing and accomplishing and achieving something, right? Like there is some box to be checked, and like enlightenment did it, done. Or
Right.
like freedom did it, got it, we're good.
Right.
And it's just so counterintuitive to what the thing actually is. And you write, whenever I see a lifestyle hinged on speed, efficiency, and hectic busyness, I see a life run by shame.
Mm.
And was that not just the most beautiful call in that I needed to be reminded of, like, it doesn't matter what hecticness or busyness or how worthy you view these boxes as. If you
Mm.
still see them as boxes to be checked, there is some shame under that.
Mhm. Yeah.